Morning, everybody. G'day. Well, hi, everyone. This morning we've convened a meeting of the State Disaster Management Committee ahead of the wet weather event, which is expected for North and Far North Queensland. As you're aware, moments ago the Bureau issued a cyclone watch for that area between Port Douglas and St Lawrence, because there's now a greater than 50% chance of this system forming into a cyclone, hence the upgraded warning. For those of you who are unfamiliar with St Lawrence, it's an area about halfway between Mackay and Rockhampton, so that watch is between Port Douglas and an area halfway between Rocky and Mackay. That system's expected to move towards the coast over the course of the weekend, and I'll be handing over shortly to Matt from the Bureau, who will update you on that. There are, however, three immediate areas of focus for us: rainfall, flooding and livestock, and that's following the earlier event, and I want to touch on that because I do want the people of Western Queensland to know that they haven't been forgotten, and we will continue to make sure we engage with them as this system comes on and as they continue to deal with their challenges. So let me start with rainfall. There is every likelihood that there will be large rainfalls starting from tomorrow and into the weekend and indeed next week. And it is important that we do that because many of these areas, which are expecting falls into the hundreds of millimetres per 24-hour window, many of them come with already sodden catchments. We're talking about areas in some cases who have had in the proximity of half a metre of rainfall in the last 7 days. And that does provide a big challenge, particularly on flooding, and that's where I want to turn to next. Major flood warnings are current for the Horton and the Flinders River, and the Herbert is currently moderate to major. There's different parts of the Herbert. But there are many other catchments that are at minor level, and we are obviously watching those because they are a water-filled area, and with those full catchments comes large risk of flooding. And that is a really big concern for us, hence the reason why I wanted Matt from the Bureau to speak to you. Let me turn to livestock because there's a real issue for our friends in Western Queensland. We've received just over 50 stock assessments from people on the ground, and already over 30,000 livestock losses have been recorded. This number is going to grow, and it's going to grow significantly. This is only those people who've been able to take the time to be able to do it. The likelihood of stock losses exceeding this level by many times is real. And that's why it's important that we continue to lend support in every way that we can. And I do want to acknowledge the visit by the Prime Minister and indeed the opposition leader to Western Queensland, so that we know that they won't be forgotten. Fodder drops are continuing, and that work has spared what would have been far more losses of livestock. The risk, though, remains with things like pneumonia and bacteria, because when animals are standing in water, there is a real risk with that. So there will be further losses that will be recorded in the days ahead, and further losses that will happen, which is very, very traumatic for those communities. I just want to touch on other areas, particularly preparedness. I've spoken to you at length before this year's disaster season and said to you that I do believe we are better prepared than at any time in our history. That preparedness ahead of the disaster system and again ahead of this event will stand us in good stead to be able to deal with what Mother Nature throws at us. Let me give you a few examples. 92 additional police have been deployed into the area, 35 additional state emergency services personnel, 79 Queensland Fire and Rescue. They join many thousands of local people who live and work in these areas and who are very experienced in this, but having that extra horsepower being able to come in shows how seriously we take it and how important it is that Queenslanders work together regardless where they live. During the event last year in the southeast, many of our friends from the north came to lend a hand here, and it's great to see that favour gets returned. That's what Queenslanders do in these events. There are in the order of about 60 SES flood boats that have been that are there pre-positioned in the area. There are multiple rescue helicopters. There's almost 500,000 sandbags that the SES have at their disposal to be able to work with local councils. Councils are already giving out sandbags, and it's excellent to see how seriously people have taken this. If you know you're in a low-lying area, now's the time to get your sandbags and do that ahead of an event. And it's something that we have seen a genuinely an uptick in the amount of people who are doing that, and it just shows how clever people are about heeding the warning and taking the time to prepare. And we're very grateful for people in doing that. I want to turn to transport. There remains a number of roads that are closed. At one stage in recent days, we had in the order of about 11% of the state road network out of action. So that gives you an indication of how broad the disaster event has been, and there will be more challenges coming in the days ahead, and we're asking people to stay up to date. I'll be touching on this shortly, but it's the disaster.qld.gov.au website, and we'll put all of the road closure information on that. I've had another request from a Western mayor, and I mentioned this to you when I spoke to you last, but I do want to do it again. Please don't use Google Maps as the source of truth. The source of truth are those local people on the ground who are feeding us the information that goes on the disaster.qld website. Google Maps does not know what's happening on the ground, and as a result, people are taking roads that are impacted, and that is putting them at jeopardy. So don't trust a company headquartered a long way away. Trust the locals, and that's the best source of information that we can do. Turning to health. All hospitals are operating at the moment as normal, and I want to thank all of the staff from Queensland Health and indeed the private sector who work to be able to provide those services. There have been 8 cases of melioidosis recorded this year following the flooding events, and I just want to make 2 points. The first is, I know it's early days in the next rainfall event, but if there is the need for people to clean up, please take precautions. We embarked on a very large campaign last year to educate people about the risks of melioidosis, and I'm just asking people to put that in the back of your mind when it is time to do a clean-up in whatever shape that takes. Please consider that. I just wanted to touch briefly on water infrastructure, and we obviously had, as part of the State Disaster Management Committee, we do rely heavily on our friends from local government, and I want to thank the LGAQ as well as all of the mayors who continue to dial in and give us feedback. The Cairns Council have issued a statement. They've gone to level 4 water restrictions. They have some issues with their water treatment plant due to turbidity in the water supply, and if people can continue to go to the Cairns Council if there's any concerns with that, and we'll work with the Cairns Local Government Authority as we see the rainfall and what those impacts will be. In terms of support, 15 local governments have been activated for different forms of assistance. That's everything for primary producer support, to loans, to fodder drops, to small and family business. And I do want to thank the Commonwealth for how quickly they have mobilised to work with us, and indeed local government for feeding that in. To the website. There's always different places where people can get their news, and that's fine. But if you're looking for one single point of truth for state government communication, disaster.qld.gov.au, we have made sure that during the course of getting ready for this wet season that we put all of that information onto that site. And it just takes away a lot of the guesswork for people. And the other thing, there are some genuinely good tips in there about how to prepare. And it's not too late to prepare. There's still a window that people should go on there and just go through the things that you may not have thought about to yet. You have time, and it's always important that you use that time. So, finally, my message. My message is prepare now. We take these things seriously, and I know Queenslanders do as well. And just asking people just to do the little things today to help when this rainfall event does come, in whatever shape it takes and wherever it comes. There's no harm in doing the preparation now. This rainfall will impact a large area, a large population, but they have great experience and great nous in being able to handle this, which is why I do have every faith in people in the local area being able to handle whatever the rainfall and the flooding risks occur. And I want people to know that we take it very seriously. We have before the event some months ago, and indeed again now, and I'm most grateful for the way that all of the agencies have worked together. And on that, I'll ask Matt from the Bureau.
Thanks, Premier, and good afternoon. The monsoon is developing across Cape York Peninsula, with a tropical low designated 12U embedded in that monsoon. This tropical low is in the Coral Sea, around 400 kilometres northeast of Cairns. Tropical low 12U is expected to move slowly south over the coming days toward the coast between Cairns and Townsville, and at this stage reach the coast through that area early on Sunday morning. The Bureau has issued a tropical cyclone warning and watch areas. The warning areas stretch from Port Douglas in the north down to Tully, and the warning is for the onset of gale force winds, so up to 90 kilometres an hour in the next 24 hours. Further south, stretching from Tully down to St Lawrence, there is a tropical cyclone watch zone current. So that is for the onset of those 90 kilometre an hour wind gusts within the next 48 hours. The warning area includes Cairns and Innisfail, and then that watch area further south does also include Townsville and Bowen. There is also a severe weather warning current, and the key part of that warning is the heavy to intense rainfall expected as this system approaches the coast. Rainfall totals of between 250 and 350 millimetres are possible over 24 hours. For areas of the Cape and the tropical coast between Cooktown and Mackay, they're the areas we're most worried about with that rainfall, with wind gusts in excess of 90 kilometres per hour also expected within that severe weather warning area. The winds and the intense rainfall are likely to be concentrated around the southern side of the low. So as the low approaches the coast, those towns and areas of the coast to the south of the low centre are likely to see the worst of the weather. Now, river catchments in the region along the Cape are saturated due to heavy rainfall over the past week. So dangerous and life-threatening flash flooding and riverine flooding are a serious risk along the Queensland coast, particularly in areas between Hopevale down to Ayr, including Cairns and Townsville, so those catchments through those areas. And again, the highest risk will be around the southern side of the low. As the Premier said, major flood warnings remain in place for the Flinders River, but a major flood warning is also current for the Horton, and a moderate to major warning is current for the Herbert River, and it is the lower parts of the catchment we're more concerned about those major flood warnings. Warnings continue for coastal catchments in the Tully, the Daintree, the Mulgrave and Russell, and there are other minor to moderate warnings current across the region. Flood watches are also current, so that's a heads up for future flooding between Cape Melville and St Lawrence. So those rivers in those coastal areas and the adjacent inland areas are also a concern as this rainfall develops. This is a rapidly evolving situation. The highest rainfall and flooding risk to the community will be dependent on the exact path of this tropical low and its strength as it moves towards the coast. The Bureau weather and flood warnings will be updated regularly as this situation develops. Please monitor these updates from the Bureau app and also the website, and stay up to date with emergency services and the Queensland web pages that the Premier has called out. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to provide an update. So we have the State Disaster Coordination Centre at stand-up now. So what that means is the centre is coordinating activities and response across the disaster districts as well as the local disaster management groups. So the state is working with the disaster management groups as well as local government to provide response and also, importantly, preparedness. We've got a small gap in the weather here in which we're able to be completing restocking, resupply, as well as the Premier mentioned earlier, importantly, the distribution of resources and preparedness for the weather event. It's critical that people through those warning areas remain vigilant and pay close attention to both the Bureau warnings and also the information supplied through the disaster.qld.gov.au website. That website provides access to a number of local government disaster dashboards, which includes access to flood cameras and other flooding information. As Matt mentioned from the Bureau, what we're going to see is in some cases locally intense rainfall. And what we saw in the previous weather event up to date is we saw river and creeks rising really, really quickly, and some of this is quite localised, but rising really, really quickly, and in some cases trapping motorists and others. And that leads me on to my next point. You have all seen that emergency services have had to carry out a number of rescues over the last several days. That has included 2 rescue activities in the last 24 hours. I cannot reinforce to the communities, particularly across those watch areas, and people that are visiting those areas and travelling through those areas, the if it's flooded, forget it message. This is beyond stupidity when you drive into floodwaters. This is negligent activity. You are placing yourselves and your passengers at risk, as well as other people that have to come and rescue you from those situations. So as I said, it's beyond stupidity, it is negligent activity. It is not worthwhile, the short time frame that you might save yourself by placing, in some cases, family members at risk and other passengers in the vehicles at risk, as well as those emergency services responders. We saw quite a dangerous situation where a rescue rotary aircraft had to deploy and rescue a single male from a flooded riverine area, and that is quite a risky rescue, I can tell you. So we do not want to see unnecessary deployment of activities. Stay out of floodwaters. As the Premier mentioned, we have a number of Queensland Fire Department swiftwater rescue crews that have been deployed across the north and far north areas. Let's not give them any jobs to do. In some cases where we might see those rapid falls and we might need to carry out emergent rescues of people, let's leave those people for those tasks rather than activity whereby people are playing in floodwaters and entering floodwaters when it's not necessary and it is completely avoidable. So again, just reinforcing, pay close attention to the Bureau messaging as well as the messaging through the disaster.qld.gov.au website. The State Disaster Centre will be staffed 24 hours going forward. We're looking at that, or we're closely monitoring that tracking activity where that tracks. The weather south, as Matt has also mentioned, the weather south is where we're likely to see the most activity and the most flooding activity, in particular those isolated rises, which place people at risk. And we have already commenced planning in regards to where, and if necessary, we have to complete evacuations, and that will be through coordinated activity with both the Queensland Fire Department and the State Emergency Service, who also, as the Premier mentioned, have pre-deployed staff, a number of additional floodboat rescue crews, as well as floodboats through that northern area. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks very much. Over to you guys. Thanks.
Premier, we've heard that driving through floodwaters is negligent. We see it time and time again. Do you think the government would consider introducing tougher penalties like mandatory fines or something like that?
Look, I think, Alex, today's the day to focus on appealing to people's goodwill. And it's safe to say the vast majority of people do the right thing. They really do. And you see that time and time again. What Chris has outlined quite articulately is that there's an element of people who believe that somehow they're above the law and above immunity, and that shouldn't be the case. So let's focus at the moment on just putting out the message to do the right thing, and let's have a look at those things in the future.
After this meeting you've convened this morning, what areas are you most concerned about?
Rainfall leading to flooding in already swollen catchments. That's the biggest risk. Now, Matt's outlined the fact that there's now a greater than 50% chance of the low forming into a cyclone. Now, what form that takes, he'll continue to update you in the days ahead. But the major risk, far and away, is the amount of rain that will lead to flooding in areas that have already copped a battering over the last week. And that means that those rivers are primed to rise. It means that creeks are already swollen. And that means if you're in a low area, you need to be taking precautions. Now, we're talking about a large part of the state, but it's a part of the state that's not unfamiliar with this. And they do handle flooding event very well. And to see the scenes of people already getting sandbags and then talking to neighbours, that shows you that people in North and Far North Queensland understand this very, very well. All we're asking is for people to stay up to date, and the biggest risk is that amount of rainfall in already swollen catchments.
We're seeing a level of water restrictions. Is there any, are residents still able to
Yeah, I'm going to refer to the Cairns City Council on that one, because that is the Cairns Council runs their water supply. But I do ask people just to stay up to date on that, because Cairns Council have promised us they will continue to update people as that information comes to hand.
Do you anticipate that in those areas of most concern there'll be the need for evacuation centres to be set up?
Well, let's see. Let's plan for the worst, as we always do, and then we will mobilise quickly the moment that it's needed. And I hope people see that. And I went at pains ahead of this disaster season to explain to people how seriously we were taking things, because the forecast did show the likelihood of this occurring, and therefore the homework's been done and the preparation is done, and that should give people confidence that if they uphold their end of the bargain, as overwhelmingly North Queenslanders do, this will be fine. This is an event that people will be able to handle. There is the prospect of big rainfall in short windows and over a few days. And when you factor in the fact that some of these areas have had a lot of rain, and I'm talking in some places areas up to half a metre in the last week, even for parts of North Queensland and far North Queensland, that's a lot of rain. And the last couple of days have been a blessing in seeing some of those areas be able to reduce the catchment. But they still remain very, very sodden. There is a lot of water in the system. There's not going to be the likelihood of the ground being able to absorb very much, and therefore totals of the magnitude that the Bureau are predicting for those short windows of time can provide flooding challenges. But they're only challenges if people don't prepare for them. So if you are in a low-lying area, people know the drill. They know to plan an evacuation. They know about sandbagging. And for those who aren't in those areas of concern, just be mindful about not driving through flooded catchments, and make sure you've got the preparation in place to be able to deal with that event.
Is there any indication at this time what category the system may cross the coast?
I might hand over to Matt. Good question.
At this stage, there's about a 50 to 60% chance of a Category 1 cyclone, so the lowest category of cyclone that we see. There's a very, very slim chance of it getting above that. So at this stage, as it approaches the coast, it will be developing, but on the sort of western side of the system, it will start to impact and feel the effect of land, and that will degrade or detract from its potential to form into a cyclone or even a stronger cyclone.
And the current track map on the Bureau's website sort of shows it's slowing down quite significantly as it moves across the northwest, which is already quite wet.
Yep.
What message is there for graziers who have already seen more than a year's worth of rain?
The current track map does show it crossing the coast between sort of Cairns and Townsville. The track from there is to sort of slowly head south, continuing to head south. Now, the latest guidance has it continuing a bit more south than west, which is great news. It's certainly still a concern for those very flooded catchments already out in northwest Queensland, but the latest information has the risk reducing for those areas, but really have to hit on the fact that we're going to have to monitor that closely. The system hasn't even formed into a really well-established low yet. When it does, we'll have better information and we'll update that track and exactly where both the system moves, but importantly where the rainfall ends up.
Am I right that it would be called Cyclone Koji, K-O-J-I, is that right?
Yes.
Can you explain why there's been the variance in models and why it's been so difficult to ascertain until the day before whether this will be a cyclone?
Certainly. The system has been forming in the monsoon. In fact, there was two systems. There was one in the Gulf as well as one sitting in the Coral Sea. The interaction, the complexity of the monsoon and how you see those things develop. We look at a number of different models, and even within those models you can look at the sort of spread of outcomes that are expected. Now, we don't, this time yesterday, there was about a 30 to 40% chance of that system forming into a tropical cyclone. Now, we issued the severe weather warning purposefully to hit on the rain and some of the wind potential, but really the rain and flash and riverine flooding risk, and certainly flood watches and warnings were going out there. But wouldn't have been the best information for Queenslanders to start talking about tropical cyclone watches and warnings at that stage, because the probability was lower, and we do look across that spread of different inputs for those models.
Do you have any indication yet, I guess, in terms of landfall, whether that is a tropical low or a cyclone, the effects it could have below that warning area, whether that's surf or anything even towards the southeast?
We are expecting winds to reach up to 95 kilometre per hour in terms of gusts. Rainfall figures in that 250 to 300 millimetre range, particularly on the south as the sort of easterly winds pile up against the coast. There will likely be some minor increase in sea levels because of that wind, and certainly surf conditions and such like are also a concern. So all of those things are fairly standard with a tropical low or a Category 1 tropical cyclone.
Do you expect that the likelihood percentage chance of it developing into a cyclone will increase? It's gone up from 30 odd to now 50. Will that likelihood increase?
Yeah, I think the current figures is about 50 to 60%. So once we see the low actually form into a defined sort of tropical low, and you can see that really clear rotation, then that modelling will likely firm up and we'll move from there to whether it, if it does form that centre, then sure, those percentages will likely come up. If it stays sort of just like a monsoon trough and low in there somewhere, as it is at the moment, then those percentages would stay down at that sort of 50 to 60%.
Can you just clarify what type of conditions and severe weather you're expecting in the warning zone compared with the watch
zone?
Yeah.
Sure. So the conditions are the same. So the watch and warning areas are for onset of those winds above 90 kilometres per hour. Warning is for 24 hours, right? So from the northern edge right down through the warning area, that's 24 hours ahead. The watch area, which covers that whole stretch of the coast, is 48 hours ahead.
Do you expect any kind of Queensland to see any kind of effects from this system below that watch area? So south
Yeah. Well, I mentioned how the current model guidance has the system continuing to drift south. That does mean the rainfall extends down the coast and even reaches into southeast Queensland as we get into Tuesday, Wednesday next week. Now, the rainfall figures at this stage look like in that sort of 50 to 100 millimetre, maybe a little bit more range over sort of 24 hours or so. At this stage, with the catchments not having a lot of water on them over the past, say, weeks, month, that's not a huge concern. But again, we'll watch that very closely.
Can I ask about the seawater temperature and what impact will that have on how likely it's in the strength of it?
Sure. So tropical cyclones typically need around 26-degree sea surface temperatures to form. The current temps out in the Coral Sea are around that sort of 27 to 28, even maybe 29 degrees. And there are some slight variations as you look at the current sea surface map. There's areas of slightly warmer and slightly cooler, but it is still above that 26-degree sort of threshold. So the system has what it needs in terms of the warm water to develop.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks very much.
Police Minister was meeting today to
Yeah.
discuss gun reforms. Is there anything Queensland will be fighting for or is concerned about?
Well, I'll allow Dan to address that this afternoon. It's important that we're part of that discussion. It's important that we work towards, as I've spoken to you earlier this year, it's important that we work towards being part of those conversations, but also making sure that we reflective of the best information to get the right decision.
So maybe the government's already come out and said it doesn't really want to participate in the 50-50 buyback. Is Queensland her position on that?
Well, as I said, we'll be coming forward with a position early this year. It's important we get it right, and we will.
Premier, school staff reported almost 21,000 incidents of occupational violence or aggression last year. How concerning is that, and what is being done to address this scourge?
It's a massive concern, and people need to know that teachers sign up because they love educating kids. They're not punching bags, and they need to be treated with respect and decency. And one of the things we're doing is rolling out behavioural management specialists in schools, but there's a lot more work to do, and that is one of our biggest focuses. And it hasn't been a focus for a long time. And on the back of it, you've had teachers who don't feel as safe in the classrooms, and good teachers are leaving the profession, and they're not punching bags. They deserve to be treated with respect and decency, and we're going to be investing heavily in it.
So what's going to be done to address it?
Well, one of the first things we did was announce a package. I did that with John Paul early on, ahead of our first budget, to invest in behavioural management specialists. Now, there's a few things they do. One is they help train teachers to be able to deal with it, but there's also a flying squad that goes in after an event to provide that support. But I must stress that is only the first very small step in many steps that are needed. And we've spoken a lot about this. It's been an issue that has allowed to brew for many, many, many years. And we have to get this right for a couple of reasons. One is we need to attract the best, we need to retain the best, and in order to do that, teachers need to be able to feel empowered to be able to go in a classroom and not be physically threatened, and they are increasingly, even with younger cohorts, and that's why this is so important.
Premier, Cantonmere Amy Eden has flown to Japan. Should leaders stay with their local communities?
Well, I'll let her. She can address that.
Premier, it's been revealed that there's been no firearm prohibition orders
Yeah.
issued in the months since that legislation
Yeah.
came into effect. I understand it's not legislation your government
No, it's not.
passed, but will you be reviewing that? Please say it's useless.
Well, we are. I've already spoken to you. We are reviewing. We're reviewing the laws across the board. I said that in the wake of Bondi, but I spoke to you about what that looks like for me, and making sure our focus is on keeping weapons out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them, and that's what Bondi highlighted to us. I make the point, we spoke about those prohibition orders at the time. People across the board reflected on Queensland's legislation. They looked at what the other state jurisdictions had done, and people called that legislation out for being faulty, and it is one of the many things that we're going to have to deal with.
Have police asked your government for a full rewrite of that legislation?
I'd have to check with Dan on that.
Just on one more on the cyclone stuff.
Yeah.
You said that North Queenslanders are very well versed in these severe weathers. What should they be doing between now and tomorrow to prepare?
Make sure that you've got your bottled water and your food, and to make sure if you need sandbags that you got them, have batteries for a powered torch. If you do have the capacity to be able to get a spare phone charger, to be able to keep your phone charged. But all of those are precautions that many people would have taken ahead of this disaster season. That's overwhelmingly, I think Queenslanders do it better than anywhere else in the country, which probably puts us right at the top of the pecking order across the globe. But North and Far North Queenslanders particularly do it well because they've been well versed to this over many years. So many of those things will have been done by the vast majority of people. For those who haven't, either because they've been busy or they might be new to the area, just go on the disaster.qld website, talk to your neighbour, and just do those little things. There is time. There's time to do that today, and it's important that they do.
Premier, the bond says that the government was fully updated and briefed in November about their service capacity,
Yeah.
including the operation of rain and river gauges ahead of the flood season. Do you dispute that your government was briefed before those 21 gauges were identified?
Yeah, I do. Neither myself, the police minister, or even the state disaster coordinator were briefed. But let me make this point. It is imperative that we get information in real time to make the best decisions. And that means that areas that need a gauge or a radar that don't have it, there needs to be an investment in it. And that's what we've consistently said. Now, this is an issue. You're dealing with a large part of the state, and there has been an underinvestment for many years in that. We understand that, and we want to work with the federal government to invest in it. And at times like this, it shows the importance of it. Now, we stand ready and willing to be able to talk about some of those catchments where rain gauges would be very valuable, areas where there's not a radar, and that's the difference between life and death. And I'm going to call that out. And for the record, I called it out 10 years ago as a minister against a federal government of a different political persuasion, right? So this is important. I lead one of the most disaster-prone states, but one of the most disaster-resilient states in the country. To be resilient, you need a couple of things. You need people with good ticker, and we've got that in spades. But the other thing is you need good information, and that's what we are respectfully, calmly, but forcefully advocating for. There are large parts of areas where there isn't the adequate investment, and that's not a new phenomenon. We're just asking the federal government to be able to deliver for a part of the state that is prone to getting big wets, prone to being first cab off the rank when it comes to swollen catchments, so just invest in it.
So no one in your government
No,
was made
not me, not the police minister, nor Chris.
Not Anne either.
No, I haven't spoken to Anne. I just spoke to Dan this morning, but to the best of my knowledge, no. But certainly not me, certainly not Dan, who I asked this morning, nor Chris, who I just asked before we came, and thank you for the notice on the question. All right, guys, thanks very much. Thank you. See you, Mike.